All right, so we're going to be talking about the energy of the warrior and what I sometimes like to call the warrior part. The energy of the warrior is something that's very primal in its nature, and it's rooted in the very beginnings of our development as a species when we were a hunter gatherer civilization. There are certain things that we had to do to survive, and even today, the energy of the warrior certainly manifests within the world, and it has always manifested itself in different forms. We have soldiers, we have UFC fighters, even athletes, people that are very determined. This can be the energy of the warrior when you're driving through with something in this way. And there's a healthy way to embody this energy. And of course, there's an unhealthy way to do it as well. And I'm going to be speaking about my story in relation to the energy of the warrior and how I've embodied this energy for a lot of my life in a very unhealthy way. And of course, I'm going to be speaking about how I evened out, and I'm going to be breaking down the deeper mechanics and the deeper science of how this energy manifests within our psyche. So when we're talking about the archetype of the warrior and we're talking about the warrior energy in general, this is usually going to be in connection with a protector part of our psyche. And what a protector part of our psyche is a part of us that gets programmed into a role where it is protecting us from the deeper emotions that are underneath the surface that are going to be in association with trauma that we didn't process and began with our early childhood, at least when we're looking at it from a 3D perspective, but it can also get much deeper than that as well. But we'll probably save that for another video. So when we're young children, we experience trauma and we don't know how to process this trauma. So what actually takes place is these parts of us start to play these very fragmented roles. So to understand what I'm saying, I want you to think of yourself as being like the sun. And when we look at the solar system, the sun is going to be this main influencing energy that is existing. And then there are different parts of our solar system that manifest in the form of planets that orbit the sun. So I think we actually come into the world as the sun, and you can almost imagine us having these different orbiting bodies. But when we experience trauma, these parts, they kind of move out of alignment and out of orbit with our natural state as that sun, we can say, and they start to play these very protective roles. And, this is meant to keep us safe from what we don't know how to process. But as we're moving into adulthood, this is very harmful in the long run because these parts start to play a role that is counterproductive in relation to our soul's development and in relation to actually being who we came here to be. We can't actually be authentic to who we are if we have these parts of us that are always in this protective role. So when we're going through an ego death, what we're actually doing is not killing the part or killing the ego, which, is comprised of all of these different parts. But what we're actually doing is dissolving our over-identification with that part so we can put it back in its natural, healthy orbit. So there are parts of us that can kind of take on this warrior, we could say, attribute and archetype as a form of, we can even say, protecting our inner child and protecting us in general. But, once again, this has to be balanced. If we think we're the part, then we're actually, not being that sun in which the parts are meant to orbit around and are meant to, basically be a healthy extension of that play specific roles in relation to our internal inner system and our energetic landscape and our mental landscape in general. So, a lot of my life, I existed in this survival stress. I existed in this fight or flight kind of energy, and I was very identified with this warrior energy within myself to the point that I was actually harming other people. I was in jail. I went to prison. When I was a teenager, I spent a lot of those years in juvenile detention. I was constantly involved in different fights. I had kids trying to fight me, jumping me. I was fighting other kids. This moved into my adulthood where I got into much more violent behaviors. I was harming other people to the extent that I'm not going to go into too much depth here, but I've put holes in people. I've really hurt people. And I was heavily, we could say, identified and driven by this part of me that had these warrior attributes. It believed that it was in a dog-eat-dog world, and it was going to eat. It was going to destroy. It was going to harm you. It was going to hurt you. And it was going to do whatever it had to do to be the top dog. And this was not a healthy space for me to actually exist in. And that part was actually protecting me from all of these unprocessed emotions and all of this unhealed trauma in my system that goes back to some of the very first moments of my existence with my mom and goes back to my early childhood in general, where I kept accumulating this trauma-based energetic resonance inside of my system. So oftentimes these protector parts, they start moving into this very extreme role of doing whatever they can to protect you, even if that means it's an unhealthy relationship, even if that means it's an unhealthy or limiting belief system, and even if that means behaviors that are very destructive because they view the main threat as being those suppressed emotions in your system, because they know if they come up, you will enter a state of extreme dysregulation potentially. And once again, these parts view that as a threat. But as you go through a process of self-development, you learn how to parent these parts and you learn how to put them back in orbit as you start operating as the true self. You start operating within that sun energy, and now you're running your solar system rather than these parts running your system, because you're blended with them and you're identified with all of these different parts of you that are now way out of orbit. So the way this manifests in your life is you're now way out of orbit. So anyways, I had to create this very rigid and very protective identity that took the form of me being a gangster, took the form of me being a gang member, and took the form of me promoting myself to the world as someone that you did not want to fuck with and you did not want to mess with. And if you messed with me, I was going to hurt your friends. I was potentially going to want to come for your family, and I was going to do everything in my power to find you and to harm you, sometimes going much further than just a regular fist fight in the backyard. And I had many people that were trying to hurt me as well, and I've had people that have hurt me. So I was very much programmed into this warrior archetype, and I kept inflating this part of myself that could have played a healthy role. The part's not bad, but once again, it got conditioned to play, that role that it was playing, and that's how I was surviving in the streets. But I was never a victim to my environment. One may say that it was necessary that I did that, but I created that reality as an extension of my very wounded self that I was using these parts to keep me away from. And the harm in that, even though during early childhood I didn't have the ability to process that suppressed negative energy, the harm in it is if you don't go into it, you will create realities that constantly mirror that back to you. So for me, I was so locked up on an internal level. I was locked up from a very young age in juvenile detention, and I was constantly at odds and at ends with other kids that were wanting to fight me, and I was wanting to fight them, and there was always this chaos in my life. And this moved into adulthood as well, where I was very violent. I was constantly in this survival stress energy. I was harming other people. People were wanting to harm me. And I was very much identified, whether I knew it or not, with this like warrior archetypal energy. I was constantly like involved in different forms of warfare, and, I was in the battlefield. If you know anything about the streets, you know that it can be a war zone out there. People die, people get hurt. So this is the lifestyle that I lived for a very long time. And in fact, this warrior archetypal energy inside of me, I believe it even goes into past life incarnations potentially as well. And on a deeper soul level, I chose to re-explore that theme in this lifetime. But I think we'll get into that in another video. But I did want to add that as well. So, this is an example of how I was living in survival stress, and I was polarized to this warrior energy in a very unhealthy way, to where I was harming other people, and my life was, pretty consistently in danger. And I lived in these cycles from my teenage years into actually a majority of my adulthood as well, until I completely changed my life. And rather being the warrior in the battlefield, I became the warrior in the garden, who is now at peace with himself. And of course, I don't want to hurt anyone. So we have parts of ourselves that play different roles. And the warrior part, as I sometimes like to call it, can be it is a protector. And you can actually work with this part of you in different ways where you don't have to harm anyone. And it doesn't have to be an unhealthy connection between you and that part. You can work with this part to help you go into trauma that maybe you're afraid to go into, and it's going to be very uncomfortable. So you can use the drive and determination of that protector part, of that warrior part, to go into these shadow aspects with a sense of courage and even maybe a sense of enthusiasm as you're exploring these darker areas of your psyche, and as you're connected with your wounded inner child, which is a very difficult experience. A lot of people are completely in avoidance to connecting with their wounded inner child. You can use this part in different ways to drive forward with things in your life, to create certain manifestations, to put up a healthy boundary with someone, to explore your anger and to, find the roots of it. To give you an example, recently I was involved in a connection with another person, and I started to feel disrespected, and I started to feel, what's the word I'm looking for? I just started to, oh yeah, here it is. I started to feel unappreciated. And once again, I started to feel disrespected. So what I did, we can say I used healthy aggression, guided by that protector warrior part of myself, in order to say what I had to. And I let the person know that I was upset and that I didn't deserve the way they were treating me. And I also let them know that, I'm not going to completely cut you off. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a very healthy boundary up between me and between you, because of your behavior and because of the things that have transpired between us. So I use that protective part. I used that warrior energy inside of me not to hurt, but to actually help myself by the means of putting up that boundary with that other person. And I expressed a form of healthy aggression to this person. So if you're needing to say something to someone, let's say maybe you're a little bit afraid of expressing yourself, you can channel that protector part of you that can carry that kind of like warrior energy, and then you can say what you need to say, maybe even expressing a form of healthy aggression. The warrior energy is not a bad energy to channel through your system. In fact, it can be a very necessary energy to channel, but just like everything else or anything else, it's all about your relationship with this energy. Are you identified with that protector part of you because you're running away from what's going on inside and you're avoiding certain memories and certain aspects of yourself that hold a very dense trauma-based resonance? Or are you connecting with it in a productive way and from a space of love for yourself and from a space of love for others? Or are you utilizing it to keep you in a state of survival stress? If you think about the archetype of the warrior, it can absolutely be associated with survival stress, because a warrior is somebody who's constantly in battle. But you don't want to connect with this energy inside of yourself to constantly be in a fight with someone or to be attacking other people or to constantly be kind of in this battle survival state, excuse me. And you certainly don't want to involve yourself in things like hustle culture and work till you drop and grind. That can also have to do with that kind of warrior energy. You're driving forward with something, but what is your relationship with that driving forward? You want to have a healthy relationship with that energy. And I'm a person, I will always have a relationship with that energy because of things that I've been through in my life, potentially things that I've been through in past life incarnations. There's a reason why my soul choose to explore these very intense themes where there was actual real bloodshed and real battle that was taking place. And although that wasn't healthy for me in the long run, and it wasn't healthy when I was involved in these experiences that I was explaining to you in the beginning of the video, there is a deeper reason why I chose to explore those themes, even though I am no longer living that lifestyle anymore, because that's not my true authentic self. And in relation to that warrior energy, I had an unhealthy relationship with that energy and with that archetype. But now I channel that energy in a much different way. I channel that energy in a very healing way, in a very productive way that's just increasing my evolutionary momentum of better understanding myself and further, doing what I came here to do on that deeper soul level.